A new addition to the dungeon by Holy. It had been a couple of months after Rainbow had seen Gilda. She would occasionally worry about where she had gone, or why she would leave her without saying goodbye. In the end, she knew that Gilda would be back, or she hoped so. She didn't want her friend out of her life after they had just made up. Rainbow didn't worry too much about it these days, though. Gilda could live her life however she wanted to, and she was going to do the same. As long as they weren't fighting ancient evils or having to deal with disappointing parties. Rainbow Dash gently soared through the skies overlooking Ponyville. She would usually spend this hour draped over a particularly comfortable cloud. But Fluttershy was pretty adamant about some new tea that she just had to try. She shook her head just thinking about it. Tea? Really? That was something that Rarity or Twilight would be into, not Rainbow. But Fluttershy was one of her oldest friends, and she definitely didn't mind hanging out with her. After cruising over the woods outside of Ponyville for a while, Rainbow spotted Fluttershy's cottage and began her descent. She flew down to ground level and hit the path with a small bounce before following through with a steady trot up to Fluttershy's door. She lifted a hoof and gave the door a few hard knocks. "Hey Fluttershy, it's me!" Normally Rainbow would just barge into most houses, but last time she did that to Fluttershy, Rainbow had to pay for a broken window. The door opened slowly, and Fluttershy peeked out to confirm Rainbow's word. When she saw who it was, she opened the door much faster with a large smile. "Oh, you made it, Rainbow. I just got the tea ready. Come in," Fluttershy said softly. Rainbow rolled her eyes at the prospect of sharing a cup of tea, but kept her smile and strolled in anyway. Fluttershy closed the door behind her and hurried into the kitchen. "Oh, Rarity showed me this tea. It has a sharp taste that isn't like..." Rainbow Dash found a seat on the couch in Fluttershy's living room. Normally, she would just tune her out and nod her head every once in a while when Fluttershy started on these boring subjects, like tea or bunnies. Fluttershy kept informing Rainbow of the magnificent properties of the tea as she gave her a cup and sat beside her. Rainbow tried to hold up idle conversation as she sipped from her cup. The tea was pretty good, but Rainbow didn't think it deserved a 5-minute rant. But she looked over with an interested smile anyway. But as they talked, something began to eat at the back of Rainbow Dash's mind, and that was Gilda. Fluttershy was the last one to see her, and every time she would ask about what happened, Fluttershy would pull out a pair of sunglasses and say something weird. She wanted a little peace of mind at least. Fluttershy was still chatting away happily about some form of tree frog when Rainbow interrupted her. "Fluttershy, what actually happened to Gilda?" Fluttershy stopped mid-sip to acknowledge the question by reaching over and producing a pair of sunglasses. "Well, Fluttershy began to bring the shades up to her face, but Rainbow put a hoof out to stop her. "Would you put those stupid sunglasses away? I'm kind of worried about her, and you're the last one that's seen her. So what really happened?" Rainbow said seriously, scooting forward with a determined expression. "Well, she just left." Fluttershy rubbed the back of her head with a hoof and put on her most innocent smile, hoping Rainbow would buy it. "Come on, Fluttershy, I really..." Before Rainbow could finish, a cry of defeated frustration penetrated through the floorboard and left an eerie feeling throughout her living room. It sounded as if some poor soul was no longer sure if it wanted to scream or cry. Fluttershy was shock stiff. She dared not move a muscle and hoped Rainbow Dash would simply chalk it up to it being an injured animal in her care or something. But Rainbow Dash wasn't having any of it. "Did you hear that?" Rainbow shot up off of the couch, fully alert. Oh, I'm sure it's nothing, just the, wind? It was too late. Rainbow darted out the door, leaving a rainbow-colored streak in her wake to investigate. Fluttershy sighed and got up off of the couch and strolled into the kitchen. She took out a cloth and a brown bottle and started to dab its content into the cloth before she made her way after her. Rainbow bolted out the cottage door and came to a screeching halt outside. She looked around vigilantly for the direction of the sound. She tossed her head in every direction, trying to remember exactly where its source was. From where she was in the cottage, it almost seemed like it came from the basement. Rainbow looked for any cellar doors by the front of the house, but couldn't find any. She took flight and circled the cottage a few times at incredible speed before finding the cellar doors and bursting right through the thick wood and the padlock. What she didn't notice was Fluttershy, gently strolling towards those same doors with a slightly damp rag under her wing. Rainbow landed hard onto the hard concrete of the basement and rolled into the room. Once she found her base, she scanned the room for any oddities. What she saw next was a bit more of an oddity than she would expect from the quiet, demure Fluttershy. Lining the walls were all sorts of dildos, whips, restraints, and all kinds of different gags and toys. The solid brick walls and the fire pits lining the room threw a dull orange light all around the room, making it look like some medieval torture room. Rainbow's mouth hung wide open at the sight. But there, in the center of the room, hanging from chains and leather straps hooked from the ceiling, was Gilda. She looked horrible. Feathers all over her were ruffled and unkempt. Her breathing was sporadic and scared, even at rest, and dry fluids from past sexual encounters stained her fur and the concrete below her. Rainbow tried to form words at the sight of her old friend, but the shock of the whole situation was too much. Gilda? Rainbow said incredulously, taking a cautious step forward. Gilda looked up from her tired state at the sound of her name, and immediately tried shouting through the ball gag in her mouth to her old friend. It's okay, G. I'm here. I'll get you out from all this. Gilda didn't seem to take any comfort in her words. In fact, she looked even more desperate in her shouting. What Rainbow didn't realize is that she wasn't crying for help. She was trying to warn her. Rainbow Dash attempted to hurry over to her old friend, but before she could even get a step in, a hoof shot in front of her and yanked her off of her hooves mid-stride. The unexpected force pulled her back and pushed the damp rag over her muzzle tightly. Gilda watched in horror as her one hope of escape futilely thrashed her hooves around before slowly easing to sleep. None other than Fluttershy laid her down gently onto the concrete once she was sure she was out. Gilda gave a cry of defeat and a weak thrash against her bonds as she saw her only hope of seeing the world slowly fade out in front of her. Well, that isn't how I expected today to go. It looks like we have a new toy to play with, Gilda, Fluttershy said with a deviant smile. Also, I thought we had gotten rid of your little outbursts. I'll have to punish you for that later. Gilda grimaced and shook her head at the pain that was sure to come. But for now, Fluttershy looked down at Rainbow as she peacefully slept, unaware of her new life in the dungeon. I have to get ready for our new addition. Fluttershy's smile grew larger as she thought about the fun to come, but Gilda only whimpered lightly in the corner. Fluttershy tied Rainbow to a hook in the corner to ensure she wouldn't escape, then promptly left without a word, no doubt to go into town for more toys. Tears of defeat streamed down Gilda's face and beak as she whimpered into her gag. She felt limp against her bonds and gave up trying to stay awake. Rainbow woke up in a haze and attempted to make sense of her surroundings. Once she recognized the dull brick walls and the limp griffin to the right of her, she attempted to jerk out of her prone position. Instead of hopping up to her hooves, she flailed about uselessly with her front hooves tied together in some sort of leather sleeve. Trying to move her back legs revealed the same problem. A small sense of panic began to rise in Rainbow Dash when she realized she couldn't move. She thrashed and pulled against the sleeves, but they didn't give her an inch. After she had worn herself out, trying to pull against the leather binds, she fell onto her side facing Gilda. The more she inspected her, the more she began to panic. Long scars, both new and old, traced lines all up and down her bright red flanks. Saliva and Celestia knew what else stained the off-white feathers on her breasts. Sweat matted her fur all across her body, and there was no mistaking what stained her lower back, tail, and most of her back legs, as well as the concrete below her. Rainbow couldn't imagine what her friend had been through down here. Just thinking about the amount of times she had to have been down here made her feel bad. But when she thought of herself having to suffer the same fate, that feeling was replaced by even more panic. The newly repaired cellar door swung open, letting a gentle evening light that mixed with the dancing firelight on the concrete by the stairs. Fluttershy trotted down the stairs in attire appropriate for her intentions. A fishnet vest and leather socks hugging her legs almost all the way up, and a small horsewhip under one wing. "Fluttershy, what the hell are you doing? Let's go!" Rainbow yelled as soon as Fluttershy came into sight. "Now why would I do something like that? I have so much planned just for the night, so be quiet, so I can take care of Gilda's attitude problem." "Fluttershy, this isn't cool. This has to be against the law or something." Fluttershy sighed as Rainbow tried to reason with her. She walked over to the wall where all her various toys and bonds were and picked up another ball gag. "Fluttershy, are you even listening to me? What are you—" Rainbow was cut off as a rubber ball turned her voice into muffled moans. Fluttershy tied the ends together behind her head and went back over to the wall, despite Rainbow's muffled yells of protest. Fluttershy looked over the many racks for the perfect toy for the occasion. She brought a hoof to her chin in thought, then picked a dildo off the wall that looked almost 1.5 feet long, and bounced it up and down in her hoof to get a feel for its weight. Rainbow's eyes widened in shock when she found Fluttershy carrying the massive toy. Rainbow tensed up as Fluttershy disappeared out of sight behind her, but let out a sigh of relief as she saw her move past her to Gilda. Gilda still lay limp against the chains and ropes that kept her suspended from the ceiling. Fluttershy set the unusually long dildo on the ground and brought a pail of water from the corner. She emptied its contents all over Gilda's face and chest, jolting her back to the land of the living with a muffled yelp. "Wake up, sleepyhead. You didn't forget about that punishment I owed you, did you?" Fluttershy cooed in a caring voice as she took off Gilda's gag. To Rainbow's surprise, Gilda said nothing in protest. She simply grimaced and whimpered lightly as Fluttershy picked up the massive dildo off the concrete. This only made Rainbow more anxious. What in Equestria could Fluttershy have possibly done to break Gilda down like this? Rainbow thought as her breath quickened at the thought. "Shh. This will be quick. We have much more fun to get to," Fluttershy said gently to try to soothe the worried Griffin. She caressed one flank with her hoof gently, while the other positioned the massive toy behind her. Just as Gilda's whimpering began to calm down, Fluttershy pushed the massive dildo up Gilda's ass. Gilda squawked, and her eyes shot open in pain. Once the initial shock wore off, Gilda went to stifled groans of pain with every tiny thrust as Fluttershy inched the massive dildo inside of her. Her grimace worsened as every inch began to contort her insides to suit the massive object. Fluttershy met some resistance, but was resilient to continue pushing the entire length into her ass. Rainbow looked on in horror as the last couple of inches began to disappear inside of her, and a small bulge began to move around her belly. Gilda's breath became nothing but inhales and strained whimpers. Fluttershy continued to caress her flank gently, trying to calm her down. But the dildo penetrating her had sweat matting her fur already. Once Fluttershy figured she had wiggled it around inside her enough, she jerked it out of her haphazardly, making a little pop. Gilda squawked again at the sudden absence of the length that occupied most of her intestines. After the shock of the whole experience wore off, Gilda fell limp against her bonds again, and looked like she might pass out again. "Now, we just have to get you clean." Fluttershy moved around to face Gilda. With one hoof, she lifted Gilda's face to meet hers. She looked into her hazed eyes with a smile, then gently opened her mouth. Gilda put up no resistance as Fluttershy leveled the dildo over her mouth and placed the end of it on her tongue. Fluttershy pushed the fluid-covered phallus down Gilda's throat, but much more softly than when she had done it in her ass. Her throat put up much less resistance, as Rainbow could see the bulge of the head of it move down her neck and down to her breast. Gilda jerked forward a bit with a choke, but the dildo kept her neck straight. She tried to inhale, but it was no use. Gilda didn't put up much resistance to what looked to Rainbow like she was being suffocated. She had small convulsions of being choked, and her face began to turn blue, but a defeated look in her eyes told Rainbow that she was used to it. Rainbow tried to yell that she was killing her, that this was going too far, but all that came out was a muffled when she tried it. Just when it seemed that Gilda might pass out, Fluttershy took it out of her, giving her room to inhale sharply, then fall limp again. Fluttershy flew over to the wall and put the toy up, and grabbed the horsewhip and a bottle of lube in its place. The sight of Fluttershy taking flight reminded Rainbow that she had wings as well, and tried flapping them to escape. When her wings refused to lift past her side, she looked back to see the same fishnet vest that Fluttershy was sporting, albeit without the wing holes. In Rainbow's struggle, she didn't notice that Fluttershy had disappeared behind her. Before she could look back to catch a glimpse, a collar was hooked around her neck, and the gag in her mouth was jerked off of her. "Fluttershy! Before Rainbow could further voice a protest, Fluttershy yanked the collar and started dragging her towards Gilda like someone trying to walk a cat. Fluttershy found a suitable position for Rainbow Dash directly behind Gilda. After a few more tugs to make sure, once Rainbow's throat was alleviated of the pressure, she tried to speak up once again. "Let me go! Would you, Fluttershy brought the whip down on Rainbow's flank hard. The loud snap that filled the room made Gilda flinch reflexively, and made Rainbow sound like a filly again. Gilda forced herself to keep her eyes forward. She knew full well what Rainbow was about to go through. "Ow! Fluttershy! Fluttershy brought the whip down on Rainbow's flank yet again, breaking the skin above her cutie mark, and the pitch of her voice went up another octave. Fluttershy wrapped a lock of Rainbow's hair and pulled her back towards her. The residing pain kept a grimace on her face and left her weak to protest. "You will call me master, slave. Nothing else. You are not to speak unless spoken to. Is that clear, slave?" Fluttershy said sternly to her ear. "What? Fluttershy, please. Fluttershy lashed Rainbow without missing a beat. Even through the searing pain on her flank, she could feel drops of blood begin to make their way down her leg. Rainbow's fighting spirit was slowly being whipped out of her, and she could feel it. "Please, just Rainbow's voice was reduced down to pathetic whimpers after the echo of the snap across her flank stopped resonating. "Is that clear?" Fluttershy yanked Rainbow's head a little closer each time for emphasis. "Yes." Rainbow closed her eyes and hoped to Celestia the whip wouldn't come again. Fluttershy looked down at her with a frown and immediately brought the whip down harder than she ever had. Rainbow clenched her teeth so hard she feared she might crack a tooth. She couldn't register anything but pain from the back half of her body, and tears began to flow freely down her cheeks. Yes? What? The pain began to interfere with Rainbow's breathing. She could barely put words together at this point. Yes, Master, Rainbow said, trying to choke back a sob. Good. Now since you've been such a good girl, Gilda, I'm going to let Rainbow give you a little reward. Fluttershy took off the leather sleeve constricting Rainbow's back leg and replaced it with a bar with 2 cuffs on either end, similar to one keeping Gilda's legs open. Rainbow was too worn out to resist. Fluttershy stood her up and positioned her right between Gilda's open legs. Once Rainbow focused in on what was in front of her, she turned beet red. A lump formed in her throat at the thought of what Rainbow wanted her to do to her oldest friend. I need to prepare something special for you, Rainbow, but in the meantime, I want you to pleasure Gilda here. Fluttershy hooked the leash on Dash's collar to one of the chains holding Gilda up, then began to walk away towards the wall to inspect its contents. You have 30 seconds to make her start moaning. If I don't hear anything after that, I will start adding whippings, Fluttershy said casually without even glancing back. Rainbow looked forward into Gilda's already moist folds. While she would never want to put this on her oldest friend, the pain still burning across her flank reminded her what the cost of disobedience was. Gilda looked back at Rainbow uneasily. She had to admit, she always wanted their relationship to come to this point, but not like this. Finally, Rainbow reluctantly took the first plunge, closing her eyes and streaking her tongue across Gilda's slit. Gilda gave a sharp inhale at the sensation, already letting out a quiet moan. Rainbow tried not to think about what she was doing, but the fluids coating her tongue and the soft flesh at the tip of it were too hard to ignore. Gilda's moaning increased as Rainbow worked harder to keep away from the whip. Gilda wanted to tell her herself that she was just trying to spare Rainbow the pain, but the pleasure she was getting from it was quite real. The two forgot about the world around them as they closed their eyes and focused on the intimate act. Rainbow kept telling herself it would all be over soon, and to just get it over with, not thinking about how long Gilda must have been there. Gilda enjoyed herself for the first time in months. Her ass was still a bit gaping and sore from earlier, and the flesh on her flanks was as raw as ever. But for once, since she had been trapped down here, she could actually feel painless pleasure. Rainbow Dash wasn't about to be so lucky. Without them noticing, Fluttershy returned to face Rainbow's ass. She held out her hoof and squirted a liberal amount of lube all over it. A monster of a dildo shaking as she did it. Fluttershy figured that Rainbow was a bit smaller than Gilda, so she would have to put the massive toy that poked her front hoof somewhere a bit more flexible. Fluttershy put her hoof up against Rainbow's pert asshole, eliciting a yelp from her. Shh, keep going. Fluttershy tried to calm her down with a gentle massage to her unmarked flank, but this didn't ease Rainbow's nervousness. She decided to do what she was told, fearing the whip was coming down again. Even trying to be complacent, she couldn't help but squirm at the cold touch of the lube as Fluttershy coated her ass with it, suspiciously leaving her vagina untouched. A bit of panic began to well up inside her again. She had never been fucked in the ass before, and this was not how she wanted her first time to be. Especially seeing what she had done to Gilda. Rainbow tried to ignore the foreign feeling against her anus and just focus on keeping Gilda moaning. Fluttershy had other plans. Once her hoof and Rainbow's ass were sufficiently lubricated, She thrust her hoof into Rainbow and didn't stop until a good portion of her leg was inside of her. Rainbow's eyes shot wide open. She jumped forward, but with nowhere to go, she buried her muzzle into Gilda's slit and screamed her agony into her. The intense vibration made Gilda moan uncontrollably, but Rainbow's world became nothing but pain as she could feel the stinging sensation of ripped flesh around her ass. Rainbow tried to recollect herself, but the tears streaming down her face and the constant stream of whimpers coming out of her made it difficult. Fluttershy traced the whip in her wing across Rainbow's flank. "I didn't tell you to stop." At those words, Rainbow pushed her face back into Gilda's muff and began working fervently. Gilda moaned louder than ever once she started up again. Once it seemed that Rainbow's inside had gotten used to Fluttershy's hoof, she began to thrust it into her deeper and pull it out rhythmically. Fluttershy pushed deeper and deeper into Rainbow, and could see her hoof begin to poke against her tummy at times. Between her muffled whimpers, Fluttershy could almost hear quiet moans coming from Rainbow. Fluttershy smiled, waiting for the right moment so she could use the massive strap-on between her legs. With her one free hoof, she began to rub lube all over the almost tree-trunk-sized apparatus. Gilda couldn't keep it down any longer. Rainbow softly moaned into her on top of every lick she made. The gentle vibration of her voice, and just thinking about who was doing it, finally sent Gilda over the edge. Not even caring if Fluttershy heard her or not, she arched her back and pushed back into Rainbow's muzzle, convulsing around it and screaming her pleasure around the brick walls. Fluttershy took this as a sign to begin. Gilda fell limp against her bonds, and Fluttershy pulled Rainbow away from her, a thin strand of Gilda's excitement still clinging to her tongue. "Now we can finally start," Fluttershy said mischievously as she unhooked Rainbow's leash from the chain. With a devious smile, Fluttershy yanked Rainbow by the neck and threw her to the ground by the wall. Rainbow hit with a dull thump and gave a small grunt from the impact. Before Rainbow can do anything to recover, Fluttershy straddled her and put a hoof against her head as she probed her ass with the massive toy. "Fluttershy, wait!" Dash said, trying to reason her way out of the situation in a last-ditch effort to save herself from the monster poking at her ass. Fluttershy silenced any further attempts to talk with a swift snap of the whip in her wing against Rainbow's flank. "Quiet, slave," Fluttershy said through Rainbow's wail. With a slow but steady pace, Fluttershy began to force the dildo inside of the poor mare, making Rainbow let out a constant scream through her gritted teeth. "Yeah, you like that, don't you, you arrogant slut?" Fluttershy pushed into her with vigor Gilda had never seen. Every couple of inches, she would whip her again to hear her yelp and moan in the excitement of the sound. Gilda tried to ignore the constant drone of Rainbow's agony and the frequent yelps that interrupted it. She focused on the shackles on her left hand instead. She pushed the filed-down claw into the worn joint of the shackle. "Oh, yes. Take it all, you old competitive bitch. I've been waiting for this for so long." Fluttershy had most, if not all, of the strap-on pushed into her at this point. The bulge on her abdomen was clearly visible. Her insides contorted to fit the shape and made her weak from the sheer pain. Fluttershy pulled her hips back and started to hump into her as she finally began to accommodate. She drove her into her with excitement and began to whip her flanks for no reason other than her own pleasure. Rainbow screamed and yelped, but Fluttershy only reveled in the pain. Finally, Rainbow could take it no more. In an instant, she fell silent into a state of blissful unconsciousness. Fluttershy noticed this and stopped mid-stroke, shaking her head in disapproval. "No, this won't do at all." Fluttershy dismounted the poor mare and turned to most likely get a bucket of water to wake her up. But before she could make a full 180, a clawed fist slammed into her cheek with enough force to knock out a few teeth. Fluttershy flew across the dungeon and slid right into the wall, taking a few toys down with her. Gilda had to stop herself from flying over to her and beating her to death. She had to get out of here before she pulled anything else, and it looked like she was out cold. Gilda limped over to Rainbow Dash and pulled all of the leather and straps off of her. All Rainbow could do was whimper in her sleep as Gilda picked her up and limped towards the exit. As Gilda painfully walked up the stairs, she cast a look of pity to her old friend draped across her back. She knew neither of them would ever fully recover from this, emotionally or physically. But knowing Fluttershy was going to get what was coming to her gave her solace. Gilda pushed open the cellar doors and stepped onto the grass. The feeling of freedom and fresh air was almost too much for her, but she had more important things to take care of than enjoy the night air. With a stretch of her neglected wings, she pushed off into the night with her friend, and as far away from that cellar as possible. It had been 3 months since Gilda and Rainbow escaped and led the guards right to the dungeon master herself to make the arrest. Fluttershy had gone through a short trial and was sentenced to quite a sum of time to a Canterlot jail. Her friends were quite shocked, and so was the rest of Equestria. The element of kindness, the dungeon that says otherwise, riddled headlines across the country. It brought about a lot of controversy about the princess trusting such a great power to Fluttershy really didn't care. A dull stream of sunlight poured into the hard, concrete cell, not providing much light, but barely illuminating the thick wooden door trapping its occupants. Fluttershy laid on the bed, staring at the crack in the wall. A constant drip from somewhere in the room tore her sanity, and constantly echoed across the barren room to make it even worse. Fluttershy blew a strand of hair out of her face. There wasn't much she could do besides get her coat even dirtier and stare at the wall in her new prison. She spent most of her time with a hoof nestled between her thighs, recalling the events that got her into the cell. Fluttershy sighed into the filthy mattress, just wishing something would happen already. A loud clang and the sound of rusted metal moving filled the room. Fluttershy perked up and focused on the motion of the door as it swung open on rusted hinges. Princess Celestia herself stepped through the doorway, bringing light into the room and a lively beauty with it. The clean, attractive princess contrasted with the dark, molded cell and seemed surreal to Fluttershy's dark, adapted eyes. "You've got a great deal of trouble in your heinous crimes, Fluttershy." Fluttershy rolled her eyes and put her head back down on the mattress. She had heard enough of this for a lifetime. Princess Celestia's stern eyes demanded attention, but Fluttershy wasn't giving it. The princess stepped close to her, and her horn lit up with unspeakable power. "So, I have decided to..." The princess paused, a smile crept up on her face, and a majestic marble dildo, rivaling Fluttershy's biggest, floated out from behind her. "To carry out your punishment myself." For weeks to come, nobles complained about the absence of their princess throughout the day, and citizens all over Canterlot reported strange moans at the oddest of hours. "Woo! Finished! Woo! Yay!" This was a commissioned piece. The person who commissioned it would rather remain anonymous, and I respect that. So, just a heads up. Yeah. Somehow it got worse in comparison to the last thing. Oh my god. Wow. I don't even know what to say. I mean, whatever, man. It's a kink for some peeps. It's a bit extreme for my taste, but then again, what do I know? I'm just a random dork. I really hope you enjoyed the reading, And if you would like to commission me to read something or just to do anything really, you can either email me or send a message to my YouTube account. Alright. My voice is dying, I think. I think this is about as much as I can do. Alright. Bye bye. Till next time.